Something happened at the end of Cleveland's mandatory minicamp that I genuinely can't stop thinking about. And it wasn't a touchdown. It wasn't some highlight reel throw that's going to get clipped and circulated on social media for the next 3 days. It was something much smaller than that, which is exactly what makes it so hard to set down. I've been covering NFL practices long enough to know that the big moments are almost never where the real story lives. The real story lives in the quiet stuff, the stuff that doesn't make the clip real. And what I watched on that final day of Cleveland's 3-day minicamp session gave me more clarity about where this quarterback competition is actually headed than anything I've seen from either of these guys all spring. Let me tell you what this situation actually is before I get into what I saw, because I think a lot of people are coming to this competition with a framework that just doesn't fit the reality of it. Deshaun Watson is a former franchise quarterback who was once handed the largest contract extension in the history of professional football. His story since then has been defined by injury, by prolonged absence, and by the kind of institutional loyalty that organizations develop when they've made a massive investment they're not ready to walk away from. Shedeur Sanders is a first-round rookie who carries his father's name into every room he walks into, which means every rep he takes gets filtered through a level of skepticism that has nothing to do with what he actually does on a football field. The psychological terrain here is genuinely brutal, and I want you to hold that in the back of your mind as I walk you through what I saw, because the way Sanders is navigating it is actually part of the story. The final day of minicamp was not a flashy practice. I want to be completely upfront about that. It was run game heavy, lots of handoffs, lots of short completions and rhythm throws, the kind of session that casual observers dismiss as low information because there's nothing spectacular to point to. I've never agreed with that instinct, and I disagree with it even more strongly now. The check-down game, the willingness to take the disciplined play when the explosive play isn't on the table, to trust the process, to be okay with 3 yards and a first down when the defense has taken everything else away. That is genuinely one of the hardest things to develop in a young quarterback. It requires a maturity that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with how a player is wired. And what I noticed watching Sanders work through those moments was that his intensity level, his processing energy, his focus, none of it changed based on how important the play looked. He brought the same locked-in presence to a check down on 3rd and 3 that he brought to every other snap of the day. That tells me something real about who he is. But that wasn't the moment that stopped me in my tracks. This is the part I want you to actually picture, because the way it unfolded was almost deceptively ordinary. And that ordinariness is precisely what made it so significant. Sanders comes up to the line of scrimmage. The ball isn't even snapped yet. The play hasn't started. And his eyes are already moving through the defensive alignment with a kind of calm, deliberate precision that you don't usually see in a quarterback who hasn't been running a system for years. There was no hurry in it, no panic. He was reading coverage structures the way someone reads a document they've already memorized, not searching for information, but confirming what they already expected to find. He identifies something. His left hand goes out, hot route to the receiver on that side. Then his right, an adjustment to the protection call for the offensive line. In the span of about 3 seconds, he had essentially rebuilt the play at the line of scrimmage, calmly, fluently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I had to watch it back twice before I could fully articulate why it unsettled me in the best possible way. Here's why that matters so much, and I want to take a real minute on this, because I think the public conversation consistently undervalues this dimension of quarterback play. When you watch a quarterback make pre-snap adjustments, it's very easy to treat it as theater. Arms waving, hand signals flying, guys moving around. It can look impressive without necessarily meaning anything. The way you distinguish real pre-snap processing from cosmetic pre-snap activity is by asking whether the adjustments actually map onto the defensive information being presented. Is the hot route being signaled to the right place based on the coverage? Is the protection call anticipating the correct pressure window? Is the quarterback demonstrating that his brain has absorbed the defensive structure and generated a real, correct response to it? not just performing the motions of doing so? What I saw from Sanders was the real version. The adjustments were accurate. They were timely. They were the product of someone who has done the film work, built the mental library, and developed the internal confidence to actually trust his own read in a live environment. That is not something you can fake, and it is not something you can manufacture in a single off-season. It is constructed slowly through hundreds of hours of preparation, and it was showing up on that practice field in May. The context around this matters enormously, and it connects directly to something I've been thinking about ever since Todd Monken came in to run this offense. For a frustrating stretch of seasons, the conversation around Cleveland's offensive system was essentially about constraint, about how the structure they were playing in limited what their quarterbacks could actually do. The offense under the previous system was built around predetermined read sequences and scripted play calls. When the defense took away what was designed, the mechanism to pivot, to rewrite in real time, to respond to what the coverage was actually showing, wasn't always built in. Quarterbacks were functioning as executors of a preset plan rather than live decision-makers who could reshape the play at the point of attack. And when a defense cracked that script, there wasn't always a built-in answer. Monken is constructing something fundamentally different. His offense is designed around quarterback intelligence. It's designed to flex, to give the signal caller genuine agency at the line of scrimmage, the freedom to process, to adjust, to operate as the actual cognitive center of the unit rather than a sophisticated relay mechanism. And watching Shedeur work inside that framework this week, the alignment between what Monken is building and what Sanders is already doing is almost uncomfortable in how precise it is. This isn't a quarterback being asked to learn a new system. This looks like a system being built for a quarterback who already thinks this way. The developing connection between Sanders and Denzel Boston is something I didn't expect to be talking about this early, and I want to make sure it gets the treatment it deserves because I think most coverage has glossed right past it. There's a difference, and it's a real, observable difference, between a quarterback and receiver running plays correctly and a quarterback and receiver who are genuinely in sync with each other. The distinguishing marker is anticipation. When there's real trust between a passer and his target, the ball is already in the air before the route break is fully finished. The quarterback is throwing to a location, not a person, a location that exists in the next half second of the receiver's movement, based on a deep understanding of how that specific player accelerates, how he sets up his breaks, how he creates space against different coverage techniques. Building that anticipatory layer takes time. It takes shared reps and honest communication and a kind of mutual vocabulary that only develops through extended repetition together. The fact that there are already visible flashes of it between Shedeur and Boston before a single preseason game, that's not a minor detail. That's genuinely meaningful. That kind of chemistry doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen in 3 days unless the groundwork has been laid deliberately over the weeks before. I also want to give real credit to Dylan Sampson, because I think he's doing something important that's getting almost no attention in the broader coverage of this camp. Sampson doesn't generate buzz. Nobody's looking for his film, but when you watch his route running in the full context of a live play, when you track how he navigates zone coverage, how he manufactures clean throwing windows for his quarterback, how he handles contact at the stem of his routes without losing his release, you start to understand exactly why a quarterback like Sanders gravitates toward him in specific defensive situations. He's not a weapon in the traditional sense. He's a precision instrument, the kind of target you go to when the coverage has compressed everything else and you need a reliable window on a specific timing route. The short to intermediate work that dominated today's practice is exactly the environment where Sampson becomes quietly essential. And the fact that Sanders is already identifying him accurately in coverage-specific situations, in May, before a single padded practice, tells me that the offensive intelligence we're talking about isn't limited to individual plays. He's reading the game within the game. Now, Deshaun Watson. I want to be genuinely fair here, because I think this conversation only has value if I'm being honest about both guys. Watson split first-team reps throughout the minicamp, as Monken had indicated would happen, and he was competent. He was clean. There were no alarming decisions, no visible mechanical red flags, no moments where you watched and thought something is fundamentally broken here. He looked like what he is, a veteran quarterback with professional command of a system, running his progressions correctly, executing inside a structure that's designed to give him clear red windows. I'm not going to manufacture criticism of Watson that isn't grounded in what I actually observed. But here's what I also can't rationalize away. There was a different quality of energy when Sanders was on the field. Multiple reporters who were physically present, working independently, not coordinating their observations, came away saying the same thing. That Sanders generated more visible momentum, more engagement from the people around him, more of what you might loosely call gravitational pull on the practice. One reporter specifically documented that Sanders had more direct impact on the session than Watson. That's not someone trying to stoke controversy. That's an experienced professional watching football with clear eyes and reporting what they saw. And when that observation starts coming from multiple independent sources, consistently, it becomes harder and harder to file under, "It's just early." There's a psychological dimension to this whole situation that I keep returning to, because I think it's the most under-examined part of the story. Think about what Shedeur Sanders is carrying into every single practice rep. He's a first-round pick, which means the weight of draft capital is already on his shoulders before he's thrown a single pass that counts. He carries his father's name, which means coded conversations about access and opportunity, and whether he belongs here follow him into every room even when they're not spoken out loud. He's competing against a quarterback who was once the centerpiece of a landmark financial commitment, a commitment that generates real institutional loyalty, real organizational inertia, real psychological gravity that no rookie wants to push against. The conditions of this competition would be genuinely difficult for anyone. And yet watching Sanders move through practice, watching how his body carries itself when a play breaks down and he has to improvise on the fly, watching how his teammates physically orient themselves toward him during a session, none of that weight is visible. He's loose, he's precise, he's competitive in the specific way that doesn't announce itself, that operates quietly and consistently, rather than in bursts. His father shared that in their conversations during minicamp, Shedeur sounded settled, not just fine, but actually at ease in the environment. And then there's the detail that honestly hit me harder than anything I watched on that practice field. The night before the final minicamp session, Shedeur Sanders was on a practice field at 8 o'clock in the evening, running footwork drills. Nobody scheduled it. Nobody required it. Nobody was watching. He just did it, because that's how his competitive mind is wired. That one detail is worth more to me as an evaluator than any single throw he made all spring. Footwork is the part of quarterback evaluation that almost never gets the conversation it deserves, and I want to spend real time on it because I've been tracking it deliberately across all 3 days. It doesn't produce highlights. It doesn't appear in any stat line, but it is the mechanical foundation that every other skill is built on top of. The literal infrastructure of accurate throws, clean pocket movement, and timing-based route concepts. The weight transfer through the motion determines trajectory under pressure. The base in the pocket determines how long a quarterback can hold his downfield vision before the protection forces a decision. A half beat of mechanical degradation in the footwork is enough to break an entire timing route concept. What I watched from Sanders across these 3 days was a quarterback who has put specific, targeted work into this. His weight transfer is clean and repeatable. His pocket movement is controlled. When the protection shifts, he's making a deliberate choice rather than reacting to pressure. And his eyes stay downfield when the pocket moves. That sounds simple. It is not. The natural instinct under pressure is to look at what's threatening you. Overriding that reflex requires hundreds of deliberate repetitions specifically designed to rewire it. Sanders is doing it consistently. You can measure the improvement against where he was when the OTA period opened. Those 8 o'clock sessions are showing up in the mechanics. The 6 weeks that open now will be largely silent from an outside perspective. No cameras, no reporters, no structured evaluation to measure anything against. Whatever picture was going to form from this spring window, it's formed. And for Sanders, Based on everything we know about how his competitive brain operates, those weeks are going to look a lot like that Tuesday evening on the practice field after everyone else had gone home. Early mornings, late evenings, film, footwork, building the mental architecture of route concepts and defensive alignments that will let him walk into training camp sharper than when he left. No drama in that approach. No headline. Just the work, done completely, for no audience and no external validation. When training camp opens and contact starts, that's when everything from this controlled spring gets stress-tested against conditions with no comparison. Blitzes that aren't telegraphed, 2-minute situations with real defensive aggression, physical contact that rewires every decision at a subconscious level, all of the pre-snap intelligence, all of the developing chemistry, all of the mechanical refinement. It has to hold up in an environment engineered to expose whatever isn't structurally real. That's the actual test. I'm genuinely invested in watching it because I believe Sanders walks into training camp ready to answer it. Not because the minicamp film is conclusive, it isn't, but because the pattern of who he is as a competitor points in a direction that doesn't typically produce soft performances when the pressure gets real. Here's where I actually land after 3 days of watching this. Shedeur Sanders won this minicamp, and he won it in the specific ways that matter for long-term development rather than spring practice optics. The pre-snap adjustments, the footwork refinement, the chemistry beginning to take shape with Boston and Sampson, the competitive energy his teammates are already responding to, and that voluntary session the night before the final day, with no one watching and nothing required. Taken together, those things assembled a picture that's genuinely hard to argue against if you're watching honestly. Whether that carries through August and into a Week 1 starting role, nobody can tell you that yet. The competition is real, the stages ahead are harder, and everything still needs to be proven under conditions this spring couldn't replicate. But if you ask me what direction the evidence points right now, after sitting through every rep of every session this week, it's pointing at Shedeur Sanders. Clearly enough that 6 weeks from now, when the pads come on and the real evaluation begins, I think we'll look back at these 3 days as the moment this whole thing quietly started to tilt.